Welcome back, everyone, to the Main Line Theory Speedrun here on the Panda School of Chess YouTube channel. Now, you'll notice that my voice sounds a little bit different today. I'm feeling a bit under the weather, but I didn't want to keep you all waiting for the next speedrun episode. So, if I sound a little bit off, then that is probably the reason why. We are currently rated 512. I'll probably have the white pieces for the second game today. And you will notice that my rating here is provisional. I have risen through the ranks a little bit quickly. Actually, we get the black pieces, okay? Two black games in a row. I'm not complaining. I get to play another Sicilian likely. Yeah. So, and that is by design that my rating is provisional. I don't want to get too bogged down with playing too many games at this beginner stage of the series. Okay, we get the English opening, which is very interesting. So I'm going to play the move pawn to e5. This is going to be my official recommendation against the English opening. Now, bishop b4 is a super theoretical move, which I'm not going to play actually. I do not recommend it. I recommend the move knight to f6. And g3, okay. So even at this beginner stage, you can see that people are actually demonstrating some reasonable understanding of how to play the opening. Or, well, maybe I'm saying that too soon, but yeah, g3 is the correct way to play the English opening. I mean, and here there are several ways to proceed. Now, c6 and d5 is what is being played at the top level nowadays, but the main line in this position classically has always been to play d5 immediately, and that is what I am going to do. And this is consistent with principled opening play. We recapture in the center, we fight for the center in this way. And now, after my opponent plays the move bishop to g2, this is where we have to pause for a second here. If we continue playing this in a typical reversed Sicilian dragon variation style, that is not going to work too well for us, because white is going to play the move pawn to d4 very quickly, strike at our center, and it is essentially going to be a Sicilian defense dragon variation where white is just up a tempo because black is playing white down a tempo essentially, right? I hope you guys understand that. So the typical way to play this position is to just drop the knight back to b6, and we are going to calmly develop all our pieces in a reasonably modest way here. Going to play knight to c6, going to play bishop e6, bishop e7, and then castle kingside, right? I'm not going to do anything particularly special here. And now the pawn is being attacked, so we start with the move knight to c6 to defend the pawn. Usually, if my opponent plays this correctly, what is going to happen is that they're going to play e3 and d4 in the position, at which point when I capture, that is going to lead to what is known as an isolated queen's pawn position. Now, it is very likely that I'm speaking of these concepts very, very early in the series. So let me hold my horses for just a little bit, just continue developing my pieces as of now. I put the bishop out on e7 because I don't really see a point of putting the bishop on the c5 square. The bishop on c5 kind of aims at nothing, especially now that they've played the move pawn to e3. And also it is liable to getting attacked in multiple different ways, right? And the bishop can't really drop back to the b6 square considering there's a knight on b6. So I like developing modestly with bishop e6. And now, maybe I'll get to talk about the isolated queen's pawn position actually. Let me start with the move bishop to e6. And if they play d4, very well. So my opponent does play in a very, very principled way actually. So we get pawn takes on d4 and pawn takes on d4. And this is precisely what is called an isolated queen's pawn position. Now there are several ways to play this position. Typically, the way you evaluate an isolated queen's pawn position is to see who has better control over the square in front of the pawn, right? So we have to prevent white from being able to play a move like pawn to d5 and eliminate the weakness of the IQP. And we are going to strive really hard in this position, as you will see very soon here, to really make sure that we control the d5 square as best as we can, right? Now, it is going to be a little bit difficult to do that as long as this bishop is aiming at the b7 pawn. So that is something we have to keep in mind as well. For now, what I'm going to do is stick to some principled opening play and just castle out of the center. Wait for my opponent's response in this position and then see how I can play this. Now, like I said, in an isolated queen's pawn position, okay, that is not a very good move because it does hang the d4 pawn. Now, even there in that position, we have to be very careful. After knight takes d4, bishop takes b7. What is going on in that situation? That's not particularly easy to evaluate that, right? Well, there we are, first of all, we are trading a flank pawn for a center pawn, and if we are worried about it in some way, we can always take the knight, right? So we have a safety knight and then just play c6 and play knight d5. That is a perfectly serviceable way, very safe way of playing the opening. But if we can take a pawn in the center of the board, then it kind of makes sense that we should absolutely calculate it, right? So let's do that. If we play knight takes d4, I'm expecting bishop takes b7. We have to move the rook, I suppose. I don't see any other way to play the position. And I don't want to do anything fancy. So let us say rook b8. The bishop goes all the way back. And in that position, I can play bishop to f6, attacking the knight. The knight likely just returns. And I have a very good position there. I can consider even trading queens and taking full control of the d file for myself. I also have the half open b file for myself. I like that position. Let us go for it. No, hold on, actually. Now that I think about it, is queen takes d4 a possibility? That is no, queen takes d4 is not possible because knight takes c6, right? And in that position the queen is undefended. If you try to play a move like queen takes d1 there, they can first throw in the move knight takes e7 check. You have to move your king, and only then will they recapture on the d1 square. So you will in effect lose multiple pieces there, so you lose two pieces. So yeah, we have to play the move knight takes d4 in this position. Bishop takes b7 is what I'm expecting. Seems consistent with how my opponent's been playing so far. Now, if my opponent does not play the move bishop takes b7, how am I likely to respond in this position? Well, bishop f6 is still a candidate move, attacking the knight in the center of the board. I can also just play the move pawn to c6, just blunting this bishop. We just have to be careful that the knight doesn't get into trouble. Okay, bishop takes b7 played. All right, so now we have to figure out if rook b8 is the only move. I'm looking at few other alternatives, but like I said, let's play this in as simple a way as possible. Note that knight to c6 here is not a threat because there is my knight defending the c6 square. And yeah, okay, well played by my opponent. He recognizes that this is not a threat. But that being said, now if I play bishop here, knight to c6, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6. In that position, I have some very interesting ideas. First, I can go queen takes d1 in that position, rook takes d1 and start fighting for the open d file, which seems very promising to me. Also possible in this position is the immediate knight to c4, right? That directly attacks the b2 pawn. Or maybe in this position, I can start with this, right? And after knight to c6, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, I can then play the move knight to c4, attacking b2. And this move b3 in that position will not be possible because the bishop will have line of sight to the knight on c3. So that is a long line. I hope you guys could visualize it. So bishop f6 seems like a really logical move in this position to me. I am going to just play it. We just have to make sure that the knight in the center, which is only defended by my queen as of now, does not get into trouble. As long as that is, well, now we don't have to worry about it anymore because we can take the knight. And taking the queen here will be a big mistake because I can actually recapture with my knight, right? Okay, my opponent doesn't do it. So far, very reasonable play by my opponent actually. Now, knight to c4 seems like a really annoying move to have to face. Because b3 bishop takes c3 takes, I win the rook in the corner. And that just attacks b2 in a very uncomfortable way. If they play queen c2 in that position. Well, let's play the move knight to c4. Well, knight to c4, I should also mention that queen takes here, rook f takes d8. Seems like a very good position for me. The queen trade kind of seems to be in my favor because of how active my pieces are in the endgame. So let us play knight to c4. I am attacking the pawn on b2. And moves like knight to c4 are what cause very serious consternation to players at this beginner level. So there is a threat, and when people see these types of threats, it is very easy to completely lose the thread of the game. For example, rook to b1 would be a serious mistake here because of just bishop takes c3, right? You can't take because the rook on b1 will be hanging. So that is another example of what a pin is in chess, right? So, and also I have to mention that a lot of people would think the way I have played this has led to a pawn structure on the queen side, which is really bad, right? These split pawns. Well, just because the pawns are split doesn't mean they are inherently bad. It is only bad if the opponent has a direct way of attacking them. And in this position, you will see that that is just not the case, right? There is no real good way to attack the a7 and c7 pawns, and the absence of the b7 pawn has actually given me the open file on the board. And there we go, actually. Case in point, right? If I take in the, well, first of all, I can just take here, but then bishop takes a6, I don't want to have to deal with it. So after bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, the queen fully controls all forward movement of the knight, which is a principle in general. You can remember a bishop or a queen 2 squares away from the knight in the center of the board will fully control all forward movement. So takes, and well, in that position, I can even play bishop takes b2. Oh, bishop takes b2 is a very interesting idea. Because then, after bishop takes b2, which seems forced to me really, knight takes b2, we are attacking the queen. And the queen has to be really careful where it moves to. We are not only winning a pawn, but the queen is also a defender of the knight on d5 in that position. Okay, let's take. It seems really promising to me to play in this way. Knight takes d5. Queen takes d5 is once again, and well, it kind of makes our life easy, right? I can, well, bishop takes a3, the pawn gets over here. So queen takes d5 in this position. I might just play knight takes b2, to be honest. If queen takes, then rook takes seems like a very nice way to play. Now, here is where I had paused, right? I didn't automatically play knight takes b2. And while that is a very reasonable move, um, I was thinking that there might be some knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6. And yeah, well, that position as well seems really promising, actually. Uh, but bishop takes b2 is what seems more natural to me. If bishop takes b2, knight takes b2 is very annoying to play against. How do I want to take? Now notice I'm winning a pawn right on the side of the board. I'm still not playing these moves automatically. That is really something I would highly encourage. So let's calculate one more time. Knight takes b2, bishop takes b2, bishop takes b2, or even rook takes b2 is really good in that position. Because knight takes, queen takes doesn't really change the fabric of the position. We can always go rook f d8 defended by the queen to attack their queen as well. And the rook does an excellent job. The rook can't move either because queen takes f2 might be a problem. Now knight takes b2, knight takes f6, queen takes f6. Bishop takes b2, rook takes b2 transposes to the same position. Right? Honestly, you know what? Now that I think about it, knight takes b2 seems to me to be the better alternative here. Well, just because it is simpler, right? We are winning a pawn on the side of the board. And we get to keep our pieces well defended from a long range. If the knight takes, well, then I can very nicely just recapture with my queen. And now my rook gets to the second rank in the position. So this is going to be very serious trouble very soon. The queen can enter into the position. Well, that is another way to do it, I suppose. We can even first play the move rook d8 in this position, actually. Oh, that seems very appetizing. Rook d8, queen e1, rook d2. But then there is back rank mate here, right? So that is a little too adventurous, perhaps. We can even just take the pawn over here. I don't see any reason why we can't just do that. Maybe we can first play the move rook d8. But rook d8, queen c1, and then this is hanging. I mean, why do we want to move the queen to a square where it attacks something, right? I don't see any reason to do that. If they play a move like rook b7, I will play queen to c6 in this position. Queen d7 will be met very nicely with queen d6. A trade of queens is a dream come true for us in this position because, yeah, then my opponent doesn't have any counter plays, really speaking. Um, okay, so the rook is under attack. Where do we move the rook? Well, any of these squares are fine, really. Just make sure you're not hanging the rook. Even rook to a6 might be a really nice idea because then I'm ready to play rook b6, attacking the queen and all of these guys, right? So I really like that actually. And notice how the rook on a6 is super well defended as well. Uh, whoa. Yeah, that's a fancy move. That's a fancy move. If we take here, they can take, and yeah, that is going to be a little bit of a problem. But in this position, there are, I mean, several different ways to take care of this situation, right? We can always play rook b6, right? If something like queen takes c7 in that position, we are losing a pawn actually. I should have given a little more thought to queen to b8. Um, let me think about this for just a second here. Well, I can always play queen d6 first to begin with, right? Queen d6 seems like a nice move. It just defends this in a very nice way. And they don't have a move like this because, well, I can just take and then take the queen. But after queen d6, I should mention this move that doesn't do anything as well because, first of all, just queen takes f8 covers the back rank. So, yeah, we do not panic in this position. We just play queen d6. It's a nice and mature move. I can always just take the queen and play queen f8 as well. That is a contingency plan against anything, and that position is just completely winning for us, right? Okay, now let us think about this. This move here. Well, actually, can I just take the queen now? No, I cannot because after check, queen f8, they have rook e8, and there I might be just losing in that position. So what happens on c5 in this position actually? Okay, c5, queen takes d6, rook takes d6 is just completely winning once again. I can also just play h6. Very reasonable move. Creating a little bit of loft for my king. Actually, you know what? Let me just play h6. It is certainly the simplest way to play this position. Queen takes here, rook e8. Well, yeah, that doesn't really do anything in this position. I can just take, and go king h7. So, not really worried about that. Well, if I do that, however, what is going to happen is the f7 pawn is going to hang. So, how do I handle this? Well, one way to handle this is to just play c5. Here, queen takes, king takes, rook check, king e7, rook b7 check, king f6, and that's it. There are no more checks in the position. And I'm just completely winning, right? If they go here in that position, I can go check and put my rook over here and start pushing this pawn, which is just winning once again. Yeah, let's play the move pawn to c5. That required a little bit of calculation, but at the end of the day, it's just completely winning. Maybe I should have played c5 on the previous move itself. That would have been more clinical as compared to h6 likely. No, yeah, this is quite easy. Something like this, we can always go back to the d6 square as well. There are no problems on the back rank anymore because I can just go king h7. Alright, so we have navigated a reasonably complex endgame actually, if you think about it. Now, here is a very nice idea. We can achieve a trade of rooks in this position with rook to b6. They can't take here because this is hanging. If they move that, the only move actually is queen to d3 because otherwise they just lose a full rook. And the queen endgame is really easy to navigate. Let's take the rook. And now, how do we play this? Well, we can always go like queen to c8. No, queen endgames are very difficult to play accurately. But queen d6 can't be a bad move, just taking care of all of this. and activating the queen as well. If I can get a trade of queens somehow, then that will be really nice because I just have two extra pawns in the position. Will be completely winning. I'll start pushing my pawns. Let's okay, that just hangs the queen. So yeah, that was actually a very good game considering my opponent's rating. They made me calculate a little bit actually. No, I just played in the very standard way in which you, you know, play against the English opening. It was a very nice game. I'm very happy with that game and with how my opponent played. Although I'm really not happy with how my opponent abandoned the game. That is not what you should be doing, guys. It's very bad sportsmanship. So yeah, maybe just resign. That's a much better way of doing things. Well, I'll pull up the analysis board here and we'll analyze the game. Be right back, you all. So the English opening, right? 1c4. I recommend the move 1 e5 against the English opening, but that doesn't mean this is the only way to play. E5 is the theoretically considered the main line, but if you're a Queen's Gambit decline player, for example, then you can avoid learning something extra by just playing e6 in this position. Because after they play d4, you can play d5 and you have just transposed into a Queen's Gambit decline. Now it is possible for white to keep a distinct English opening flavor here with knight f3. But after d5 and g3, this is essentially somewhat similar to a Catalan actually. So if you're a Queen's Gambit decline player, you likely know how to face the Catalan. You can kind of transpose it to something you know. So there are several schools of thought like this which speak of different ways of facing the English opening. Of course, here there are quite a few moves after e4, d5. This transposes into a position in the exchange French defense, which is likely something extra that you will have to learn if you're a QGD player, because that is not something very common that stems from a d4 opening, right? Now, there are a few other things to learn, of course. If you are a King's Indian defense player, for example, you play knight f3, knight f6, knight f3, g6, and you can go into this type of a position. They are going to play in this way because that is how the English opening really goes with g3 and bishop g2. This bishop on g2 is literally known as the English bishop. And very often what is going to happen here is that they're going to castle, and one of the more annoying variations is going to occur where they will just play knight c3 and then follow up with d3. So if you're a King's Indian player, then you might find this particular variation somewhat annoying and don't want to go into it. uh, if you're a Slav defense player, for example, then c6 in this position will lead to a situation after e4 once again, which transposes into the exchange Caro-Kann variation. It leads to the Panov attack. This is what is known as the Panov attack of the Caro-Kann defense. And how does it transpose? Well, after e4, c6, d4, d5, they can take on d5, which is the exchange Caro-Kann, and then play c4, which is the same position, right? Now, these can be learned if you are a Slav defense player or a Queen's Gambit decline player. These positions can very well be learned. They're not too difficult, but I am just letting you know that it does entail some extra study. So since you have to study a little bit in all of these variations, in any case, I recommend just spending a little bit of time, investing a little bit of time and effort into learning e5. E5 is the main line. This is known as the reverse Sicilian for obvious reasons, because e4, c5 is called the Sicilian defense. The reverse Sicilian is truly what really takes it to white. Tries to fight for an advantage out of the opening if you're playing black against the English opening. Excuse me, guys, my throat isn't doing too well. And after knight c3, knight f6 is the classical main line. There is another variation here which you might have seen top players playing, which is bishop b4. Bishop b4 is another move. Like, it is very playable, but it's somewhat objectively the same as knight f6 in terms of evaluation. And it's not just that knight f6 is considered the theoretical main line for the purpose of the main line theory speedrun, but also that bishop b4 has a lot more sub variations that you will have to learn. So I really don't recommend bishop b4 unless you're a really strong player. Knight f6 is the main line, and that is what we are going to play. And now my opponent plays the move g3. It is also possible to play the English opening in a 4-knight style after knight f3, knight c6. The traditional way of playing this will be with the move pawn to e3. This variation I will talk about in the fourth episode, which will be a theory video once again on the English opening. So do look forward for that. And yeah, you will learn a lot about the English opening in that video. For now, let us look at the move pawn to g3, which is considered the most popular way of playing this position. So here I played the move pawn to d5, and now we have essentially a mainline reverse Sicilian. So in this position, I was speaking during the game of how you should not play it like a regular accelerated dragon with the black pieces, but with colors reversed. Because what is going to happen in this position if you do this is that they're just going to develop their pieces. You have to play knight c6. And after castles, they're threatening to play the move pawn to d4. And bishop c5 preventing the move pawn to d4 doesn't work really because of the center fork trick. I don't remember if I spoke of the center fork trick in the first or second video here. I think I did, right? In the bolter attack video. Yeah. So after d4 in this position, black is just significantly worse. You can't even play bishop d6 in this position because you're going to lose a piece in the center of the board. This is not very good. So, I mean, clearly. So in this position, the theoretical move is knight to b6. So like I said, in the mainline theory speedrun, this is not going to be a series where I just talk about theory in terms of memorization, but I'm also going to try my best to explain to you guys why a certain variation is the theoretical variation. So after knight b6, natural developing move, knight to f3, and we defend our pawn with knight to c6 in this position. Now, already in these earlier stages of the series, it is quite surprising to me that my opponent knew so much theory, which is really a downside of playing the main lines because a lot of people study them really well when they start playing an opening, and you're going to have to base that preparation, right? You're going to have to know it really, really well. But that doesn't mean that we are going to be shying away from these main lines. That's the purpose of the series, to teach you guys the main lines. So castles is the main move and bishop e7, just developing the king side, preparing to castle. And after e3, I decided to play the move bishop to e6. Now, I've looked at the database before beginning this analysis really quick. I have the chess games database over the board, master games database open here. And e3, it turns out, is not necessarily the main line in this position. d3 seems to be much more popular. And after d3, castle's overwhelming majority of the games continued with a3, preparing b4, which is a very interesting way of playing this opening. Bishop e6 is the main line here, and after b4, I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a trick in this position, which I consider the main line here. Pawn to a5. So we could have played a5 on the previous move as well, but this particular variation I like, allowing the move pawn to b4 and then striking at the queen side with the move pawn to a5. And you might be wondering, what is black doing? Aren't we just blundering the pawn? Well, no, this is a really interesting line where we can go knight d4. And the main line here in this position is to play knight d2. But what happens if they just take on the e5 square, right? Well, now you play bishop f6. And this is going to be an exchange sacrifice eventually with this rook on a1. So they can't just go back. That should be clear to you because we just win the knight on the c3 square. And they can't even play the move bishop to f4 in this position because g5 just wins a piece. They have to do this. So they kind of have to play the move pawn to f4 in this position. Now, once this happens, what we can do in this position is to go knight to b3 and attack the rook. And moving the rook is not really a good idea at all because now we can take the knight and go queen to d4, and that forks the king and the knight on the c3 square. So the best move in this position for white, which is seen in several of David Howell's games, is to play this move bishop to e3. Now bishop e3 looks like somewhat of a crazy move, and after a little bit of analysis, I've realized that it is a bit of a crazy move, strictly speaking, because I don't think anybody other than black is having any fun in this position, right? After bishop c5, rook e8, for example, they can go a4, try to protect the pawn on the b5 square. We can go queen d7, and after a few moves of analysis here, knight e4, b6 chasing the bishop away and solidifying the queenside pawn structure, I realized that in this position it is only black who has any fun. Now, an important prophylactic move in this position, and I know it might be a little too early to start talking of concepts such as prophylaxis, but for the more advanced players watching this video, h6 is a very nice prophylactic move preventing the move knight to g5, right? So usually after knight b3, that is the line that follows. However, they don't need to take the pawn on e5. They can go knight d2 in this position. Here we can sort of eat into this queenside structure with the move pawn to c6. And if they take, we can recapture with the knight. And after rook b1, we can also play the move pawn to a4, just cementing the weakness on the a3 square. Like you guys can see, right? It should be intuitively obvious that now the a3 pawn is a serious weakness that constantly needs to be kept an eye on. Otherwise, this pawn is not very far from just moving down the board very quickly. Also possible, instead of knight to d2 in this position, is rook b1. Against rook b1, you just need to protect the pawn on the e5 square because knight b3 is no longer a thing. You will lose two pieces for the rook, which is not very good. So now you can play the move f6. And f6 is once again a move that people hesitate to play. But whenever you have a bishop covering this diagonal, the g8 to a2 diagonal, or playing f3 when you have a bishop covering the g1 to a7 diagonal, it is not necessarily that weakening of a move because white can't take advantage of it in this position. And we can go a little further into analyzing this line. The main line once again is knight to d2. Knight takes d4 doesn't do anything much because now we have nicely cemented these weaknesses on the queen side from our perspective. So this is already a very pleasant position for black here. So I'm getting bogged down with the theory already here. I don't necessarily want to go too deep with the opening theory and all discussing all the main lines or the possible lines here in this video because that is what the next video is going to be about. There are also some side lines after bishop e7 to play b3, fianchettoing the bishop. These lines are also very interesting and need to be analyzed. We will do all of this in tomorrow's video. So for now, let us return to what my opponent decided to play, which is the move pawn to e3. Now, after e3, there is a very interesting subtlety in this position. You have to play the move bishop e6 here. If you castle, what is going to happen here is that white is going to play this move pawn to d4. And after a few trades in the center of the board, you might think that you're in time to play a move like c6, right? Because now you have to blunt the bishop. You can't play bishop e6 there because of bishop takes b7. They can immediately play the move pawn to d5. And I will already stop analyzing this line here because this is a really bad situation. When you're playing against the isolated queen's pawn, you never want them to push the pawn forward like this. So the better way to play the position after the move pawn to e3 is to start with bishop e6. So you have an extra defender. So what happens here if we do the same, if we make the same moves, pawn to c6, d5 is no longer an available move for white because the bishop is an extra defender on the d5 square. So this is the type of situation you're aiming for when you're playing against the isolated queen's pawn. So the general strategy in playing IQP positions while playing against the IQP is that you want to control the square in front of the isolated queen's pawn so you don't allow it to move forward. And also you want a lot of piece trades because what is going to happen is that a piece has to always keep defending the IQP. So if you trade off all the pieces, then white might get in this situation where they're stuck with only a few pieces and those few pieces have to keep protecting the IQP or something else will fall apart, right? So alright, I hope you guys understood the general IQP strategy here. Let's go back to the game. After bishop e6, my opponent just decided to take with the pawn. I should also mention here probably that since we were talking about piece trades, this type of a position is really good for us. You can just play the move pawn to c6 here and already like this position is very, very good. I mean, they have a little bit of an initiative, I suppose, in this position. But the initiative only stems from the temporary activity of their pieces. We can immediately just try to pressure the isolated queen's pawn. And the weakness of the IQP is going to completely counteract the initiative that white has. So for example, some position like this is already really good for us because a lot of piece trades, like I said, playing against the isolated queen pawn is a good situation. So in the game, however, my opponent didn't go down any of these lines. He decided to just go into an isolated queen's pawn position while keeping the queens on the board. Now, this type of a position, there is no hard and fast conclusion that you can make on who is better. It is just that in this analysis, I am going to take the side of the person against the isolated queen's pawn, but it is very possible to play these positions quite nicely with the isolated queen's pawn as well. In fact, over the board, I have had quite some success with such positions from the white side of things. The real advantage that white has in these positions is that they can very freely develop all of their pieces, and the IQP gives a nice open files and open diagonals for the player with the white pieces. But as long as you can quell their initiative, it is not going to be too bad of a situation. I decided to castle. We are still following theory, and 95 here is a very serious decision. What you're going to see very often in such positions is that white is going to play a move like bishop e3, not going for many piece trades in the center of the board. And these lines can get quite sophisticated. Usually, you want to clamp down with your control of the d5 square. So, a very interesting move here is to play knight b4. And after something like knight b4, play the move pawn to c6. If they ever attack your knight, you can always return to the d5 square. You can also bring this knight over and put the other knight on the d5 square, just so you don't have to worry about this knight getting kicked off the board. Now, there are also other ways that white can play this position. Bishop e3 is not the only move. One of the moves that I have myself played from the white side of things is knight to e4 here. This types of move are very common to the English opening. We are going to cover this in the fourth episode as well. So I'm not going to worry too much about this right now. For now, however, let us look at what my opponent did in the game after castle, which is to go knight e5. Now, knight e5 is a beginner strategy in the English opening. This is something you learn as a trick essentially when you start playing the English opening, but it is not really good at a sophisticated level. The idea of knight e5 should be pretty obvious. If we play knight takes e5, the idea is to play d takes e5, and now they no longer have the weakness of the isolated queen's pawn. So, if we take on e5 square, we are kind of allowing white to get rid of their weakness in the center of the board. So, due to this reason, I decided that I will not allow them to eradicate their weakness in the center and actually go for this trade of pawns. And this is not necessarily a bad trade for us. Like you saw in the game, we exchanged a center pawn for a flank pawn, which is always a good thing in such positions. So, I am quite happy with this trade. And now I have a bunch of open files for my pieces. So, when the game continued, I played the move bishop to f6 and he went knight to c6. Yeah, I don't have any comment on this. That's a very natural move. Knight takes a6, bishop c6. And here I must mention that knight c4 was the correct way to play. You do not want to play queen takes d1. I was considering doing something like this during the game, but then I saw bishop f4. And if I'm allowing my opponent to attack my pawn, then I might as well do it in this version, right? If they want to trade queens and play bishop f4 attacking the pawn, they can do it like this. And now I've gotten the extra move knight to c4 and instead of having to waste some time. Here I can play bishop e5 and I'm actually firmly better in this position. Something like this, the bishop is attacked and if the bishop goes back, I just win the pawn on b2 for free. So this is a nice and stable advantage for us with the black pieces. After knight c4, my opponent decided to play bishop d5 and here I actually made a serious mistake. Uh, I was thinking of queen takes d8 in this position as well, but like I said, it was leading to a situation which was good for us. After bishop takes d5, I played bishop takes d5. This was a very serious mistake, and it kind of stemmed from the fact that I did not calculate all the variations properly. I was outright winning in this position if I just played bishop takes c3, which is a move that I certainly considered. But after bishop takes e6, I just refused to calculate the variations for some reason. But now, if you notice, if we go just a little bit further and calculate a few captures in the position, I'm attacking the rook, so this has to happen. The bishop is now the important part. So if the bishop moves back, I'm just winning an exchange in this position. And this is just completely winning, right? I can go to b2, for example. And I have an exchange. I have a clear exchange and, and an extra pawn as well. Not to mention the rook on the second rank. So because this is such a nice and dominant position, I should just have played the move bishop takes c3. And that entire line is actually forced. There is nothing that white can do. After this, they can try to do this. But now we see a situation where we can take on the c4 square, and if they take on c3, we now take on f1. And even in this position, they're going to lose the exchange, right? Well, this is a little bit better, I suppose, because they do not lose an extra pawn. But at the same time, with the queens on the board and with the weakness, it might be after like something like queen d5 attacking everything in the position. This is a very pleasant position for black, obviously. So the move I played in the game, bishop takes d5, is certainly a big mistake considering I was just winning a full exchange. Here in the line, like you saw in the game, I was just winning a pawn. And these types of endgames, they're very difficult to play with the white pieces here. Being down a pawn on this type of an endgame is really hard. And you saw that I had a very clean conversion phase in the endgame. Now, I'm not going to go through the endgame in too much detail here. I think you guys can look at my commentary in the video for a good explanation of the endgame. But it suffices to say that this is very difficult. But at the same time, if you're playing against a really strong player, these positions tend to be a little drawish. Like when there are three heavy pieces on the board, the one extra pawn, it is not quite felt. If we can exchange queens and one pair of rooks, well, then that is a different situation altogether. Then the extra pawn is very meaningful. So the endgame continued. I mean, I went here. I went queen d6 here. It turns out that rook b6 is also possible. I was calculating this. But I didn't like the fact that after something like a takes b6, there is queen takes c7 here. I forgot to just look at the move queen takes b6 in this position, because now the queen is actually just trapped, so you kind of have to play something like this. And this is a wonderful position. Strictly speaking, maybe c takes b6 is a little bit better because it creates pass pawns on the further outside right of the board. So that was also possible. I just missed queen takes b6 in that position. Queen d6 is also a very good move. Here I played h6, which is nice, rook e8 and c5. Also possible once again in this position was rook b6. This is just a matter of taste at this point. Here I just like the move a takes b6. Everything is well defended. This is an excellent position once again. Just note that in this particular situation, you can't play c takes b6 because now you lose the queen. This would be a really bad situation, not something we want to go for. Alright, so I decided to play c5. A few trades later, I got in the move rook to b6. Now, it is very difficult to play here. Of course, after something like queen e5, I would have gone queen d6. You might think that there is some counterplay for white here, but there really isn't. Queen e4, queen j6 just quells everything in the position. So, after we get this type of an endgame up to clean pawns, it is just very easy. And here, of course, they just blundered the queen. But even before that, it was just completely winning for me. In fact, now that I think about it, I would go so far as to say that this move queen to d6 was a little inaccurate. c4 right away might have been even better, because it gives me the opportunity to play queen c5. And it is not necessarily a big deal that they have a check in this position, right? I can go here. So, for example, if I move the queen, let us say they go here, I move the queen out to c5 in this position. It is not such a big problem that they have a few checks in the position. I can always go here. And after queen to b1 check, I can just play g6. So we can block all checks like that. Queen d6 and my opponent blunders a queen. Very typical of a 500 rated game. Although I'm really impressed at how my opponent played this position and the entire game actually, knowing a little bit of opening theory as well at this rating. So right everyone, that will be it for today's video then. So if you enjoyed the video, then do drop a like, share the video with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and I must say that there is only so much that we can cover in videos like this. So this is mostly an opening theory series. If you want personalized coaching where I teach you all a lot more about chess, you want to learn chess seriously, then you should consider joining my chess academy. We have group lessons and one-on-one lessons, so there is a lot of personalization that goes on in lessons in our academy. So if you do want to consider it, then you can contact me through the email ID on your screen right now. So with that, I will conclude the video. Goodbye everyone. I hope you all have a great day.